Hey everyone, it's Phil Wade. How are ya? Let everybody sign on, get in, get on in. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone had a great 4th, a good evening. We are going to spend a little time on, some recent updates, some new forms. There's not a ton happening, but just definitely would like to make sure everybody is up to speed on what's going on with the new presentation. Hold on one second. All right. Is everyone able to see my screen? It's going to chat. Hey, everyone. All right. Hey, Andrew. All right. Hey, Rakesh. How are you? Good to see you. All right. Hey, Pedro. All right. So let me move the screen and we'll kind of get going. If everyone could kind of save their questions to the end, that would certainly be best. We had quite a number of questions the last time we did this, so can get a little unruly for Phil, but we can put them in the chat. But let's kind of get through this, and then we'll throw it out for questions and answers. So, all right. So let me move the screen here. All right, so just a little background, if you've not heard as much about this. So basically, about 9 months ago was kind of the first shoe to drop, so to speak. That was a lawsuit up in Massachusetts with the MLS. It's called MLS PIN. And it was really attacking, kind of the mandatory buyer agent commission. So they lost, and they pretty much went to, you didn't, it used to be you could offer $1, right? So it had to be something. It could be a very minimal amount, but then they moved to, you could put 0, right? But, the data, the co-broke, information was still, in the MLS, still available. So that was kind of the first shoe to drop. Then, this lawsuit had been going on a while. But again, in September, Remax and, Anytime Real Estate, which is Caldwell Banker, Sotheby's, Century 21, they all agreed to settle, right? So that was kind of the first indication that possibly this was going to go in a way that NAR didn't really want. And then at the end of October last year, a jury came back and ruled against NAR, and there were still a few other defendants, Keller Williams, Berkshire Hathaway, and they award this extremely large judgment, 1.87 billion, right? 1.87 billion, and it was treble damages. So basically, could have been on the hook for 5.4 billion. So, and NAR saying they are going to, fight on, blah, blah, blah. But anyway, so March 15th, they actually settle, right? So they settle, and we're going to talk about, exactly what the settlement means. We are now getting closer, right? We are getting closer to implementation, right? So the implementation, the drop dead date is August 17th, right? So we're still about, I don't know, 6 weeks away, a little less, right? But here's the thing to pay attention to. I did get an email from Southwest Florida MLS. So that covers like Naples, Fort Myers, that area. They are doing away with the buyer broker data come August 1st. So on August 1st, that MLS, there will be no more co-broke information. So, to make this harder for everybody, or at least a brokerage that is in more than one MLS, the dates are going to vary, but the drop dead date is August 17th. So, as you get stuff from your board, from your MLS, pay attention, because once those dates, like again, that date of August 1st, there is no more co-broke information in that MLS, it's all going to be gone. And that's kind of when things are changing, right? They're going to change. I mean, change is coming. It is coming. You know, how big a change this is going to be, we will find out, but it could happen sooner, right? Depending on your MLS. And we're going to talk about what the changes mean and how we are going to implement them and be compliant. All right. So the forms are going to change, right? So the listing agreement is going to change primarily around, and again, unfortunately, most states, you know, so now Dalton Wade is in Florida, Georgia, Alabama, North Carolina, soon to be in Texas, Tennessee, right? So we could have agents here from, you know, from those states. So all the various board of realtors, state realtor associations, to me, they're a little behind. These forms should have been out, but they're not out. A couple of them are out. We're going to show and talk about the ones that are out. But for the most part, they're not quite out yet. They're coming soon, right? But, you know, they're not out as of today, right? So, but we're going to talk about which forms are out and kind of what they mean. But again, the way to think of this, right, is think of it like this. Nothing is changing until it does, right? Until either as soon as that data is out of the MLS, and it's going to vary, right? Depending on what MLS you're in. But as soon as that data is gone, then we are operating under the new rules. Until it's gone, it may not be gone until August 17th. Until it's gone, we're operating under the old rules, right? Because the compensation is still in there, right? Now, again, we might want to get ready. We might want to start having our clients sign that buyer broker agreement, right? But up until now, right, there has been no MLS that has taken the data out, but it is coming out, right? So what forms have changed? So in Florida, they basically have four forms. One is a seller compensation agreement. If you remember, it's kind of like, you know, if you dealt with a for sale by owner, right? You know, their listing wasn't in the MLS. You know, one of the advantages, at least in my opinion, of the MLS was that, you know, all that data, right? You know, what are they paying? What are they paying the co-broke? And then we were guaranteed of getting paid. I mean, in my entire career, I've never not been paid. It's awesome, right? You're not chasing people around, other brokerages to pay you. Didn't happen because, you know, they would kick them out of, you know, they kick them out of the realtor association. But once that data is gone, right? At least in Florida, they've come out with some new forms, and those forms basically are one is for with a seller. We're going to show the forms in a bit. One is, you know, that the seller is going to sign, offering you commission, right? Offering you compensation, right? Without that, there is no guarantee as buyer's agent you will be paid, right? So when you're going to submit your offer, you are going to have that compensation agreement, or the other one is the seller's brokerage compensation agreement. So if the seller is offering compensation, then, you know, their brokerage, the listing brokerage, can agree to pay the co-broke, right? So you will need those agreements to ensure you get paid, right? And also, you know, the buyer broker agreement is now going to be mandatory, right? So you won't be able to show anyone a property without that buyer broker agreement. So again, drop dead date August 17th. But if you're in, say, that Southwest Florida MLS as an example, August 1st, that data is all gone. You're working with a buyer, you know, August 1st and on, you need that buyer broker agreement because if, again, it's a requirement, right? It's a requirement, you know, that is part of the settlement. So it's not like, oh, maybe, no, you need to have it. You know, what Dalton Wade will be doing, you know, when you submit your file, you know, for review and approval, you know, that buyer broker agreement needs to be there, right? And then they came out with two other forms, you know, to modify um, you know, these first two forms, meaning, you know, maybe after the home inspection, you had agreed that you were going to receive 2.5%. And then, you know, something happened and you had to give up a little bit of your commission. Now you're only going to get paid 2%. So then there would be a modification of that agreement and that would have to be signed. Right. So that's kind of what's happening in Florida. That's at least at the moment. I mean, new forms are coming, right? You know, the listing agreement, you know, is going to change, not a lot, but there's going to be some specific language saying, you know, commissions are negotiable, commissions are not set by state or federal law. And then same with the buyer broker agreement. There's going to be some, you know, changes to that. Again, the biggest one hopefully will be that you know, the prevailing party can collect attorney fees, you know, from the losing party, right? So, you know, and if that's not in there, then we're going to modify that and, you know, just make sure that's inserted because, you know, previously you had the buyer broker agreement and then, you know, you didn't get paid. And then the cost to like get the money, to get the commission, to sue that person usually exceeded what the commission was. So like, it's hard to enforce, but you know, here we'll have it so that you know the you know prevailing party can still collect attorney's fees from the other side. In Georgia, there's a broker compensation agreement and a pre-showing compensation agreement that they've come out with. At Alabama, there's a buyer broker compensation addendum. That's new, right? Again, if something changes on the listing agreement, there's another form now, you know, to sort of modify that. And then, you know, in North Carolina, there's not new forms, but they kind of address, you know, what we're going to get paid. And then all the forms, every one of them is currently in .loop, but there will be more coming. So my plan is, where are we? We're July 8th, probably as we get to, you know, maybe, you know, right around, you know, July 25th, you know, 2-3 weeks from now, we'll probably do another one of these, see what other forms have come out, talk about those, right? But, the ones that are out, you know, are all currently, you know, in your .loop. Second here. All right, so again, here's the compensation agreement in Florida, seller to buyer's broker, right? So the seller paying the buyer's broker, right? So again, you're going to need this sign, right? Because again, now there is no guarantee, right? You don't want to, you know, be out working with a buyer, right? Because what you're going to tell your buyer, at least what I would be telling my buyers, hey, I'm going to work really hard to make sure the seller compensates me, even though we're going to sign that buyer broker agreement, right? I'm communicating to them that I'm going to try to have, you know, my commission paid, you know, ultimately by the seller, you know, through this, you know, compensation agreement, or again, through the seller's broker, right? So if the seller, and again, you know, we'll talk about this at the end. What are you going to do? What is your model? How are you going to work, right? What are you telling your clients, right? So we'll spend a little bit of time on that, you know, as we get to the end here, right? So again, we're not going to go through the forms in total detail here, but, you know, read them, take a look at them. But again, you know, you're going to want this signed, right, by, you know, and again, I don't really see us having too much issue here, you know, in terms of getting paid, but it's going to document, you know, for that buyer agent, you know, we're going to be compensated. So before we didn't have to worry because the data was in the MLS. Now we need these forms, you know, to protect, to make sure we get compensated. And then again, you know, if it changes, as I mentioned, maybe it's, you know, typically never goes up, but sometimes, you know, you may have to give a little bit, lower your commission, right, to, you know, kind of make the deal work. So then you would do this modification form again, whether it's to the seller or to the seller's broker. And then in Georgia, you know, here's the compensation agreement. Again, take a look at that. We're not going to go through, as I said, in too much detail, but again, it's to ensure we get paid. Here they have what's called a pre-showing compensation agreement, right? So right out of the bat, you might get this, signed, prior to doing a showing. Again, there's going to be some personal preferences how we're going to operate when we're out in the field. Like, I mean, again, are you going to call every listing agent and ask them how much they're offering? Are they offering, compensation? Or are you going to wait, right? You took your client out, you showed them 6 houses. They're probably only putting an offer in on one. Maybe they're not putting an offer in. We've all had clients where you've had to show them, 20 homes. So to kind of get this compensation agreement on all of them, I mean, that's a lot of extra work, on, properties that your client's not going to make an offer on. But as part of that offer, let me say that again, as part of that offer, right, these forms need to go in. So basically, you're communicating that, hey, I'm sending in the offer, here's what I'm asking you to pay me. Right. So you're going to fill that out and, see if they do or if they don't. And then in Alabama right now, what they have is kind of a modification. Again, the listing agreement is going to show, what the buyer's agent is getting. This modifies that if that's needed. And then, in North Carolina, similar to 3 new forms there. Take a look at them. So again, all of these are to make sure, that we get compensated as buyer's agents. So let me stress that again. Once that data is out of the MLS, that it's going to go somewhere between, depending on your your MLS, August 1st. I don't really see any MLS doing it sooner, up to August 17th. But by August 17th, all that co-broke data is gone, right? So, but again, sellers will still be able to offer compensation to buyer's agent. Nothing is changing there. There's a possibility that third-party websites, right? The settlement agreement said the data can only not be in the MLS. They didn't say, oh, it could be somewhere else. Maybe some, entrepreneurial person, comes up with a site, charges you a couple bucks as the listing agent, and you're able to, put that data in so that, the buyer's agent, can see that, right? So, and again, I've mentioned this, I'm going to mention again, once that co-broke data is removed from the MLS, right, as a buyer's agent, you now need to negotiate directly with the listing agent or seller to see if the seller is offering compensation, right? So again, kind of, there's 2 ways of doing that. My suggestion is do it when you make the offer, as opposed to, every showing I need to know, right? No, because, many houses your client's not going to like, but certainly if there's one they do like, you're going to want to find out, and they're going to want to know, right? Because, more than likely they're going to look for the seller, to compensate you. So again, you're going to put that in, and then you're going to, need to enter into that commission agreement that, we saw on the forms before, either with the seller, right, directly with the seller, right, or with the listing brokerage, right? Maybe the listing brokerage didn't, maybe they weren't offering any compensation, the seller, to the, when they did the listing agreement. But now you present a good offer, maybe they've been out there a while and they're willing to, compensate you. I mean, we'll talk about this more, at the end, like, how's this going to go? In my own business, like, when I was out there as an agent, personally, I did a lot with for sale by owners. And what they used to always say to me, I mean, trying to get their listing, they always said, hey, bring me a buyer, bring me a buyer. If you bring me a buyer, I will pay you. Right. I think a lot of people, at least what you read and hear is, oh, the listing agent is going to dominate. Well, that may or may not be true. We have to see. And then again, if you're in Florida, I need to sign everything. It's always brokerage to broker, brokerage to seller, right? If you're in, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, Kevin will be signing, right? So, and then again, once that data is out of there, we need that signed buyer broker agreement. Every time, no exception, right? Every time, no exception. Because again, you don't want to be showing your client and then they like a house and then you find out, gee, they're not offering any compensation and you don't have a buyer broker agreement and you're not going to get paid. So you got to have that buyer broker agreement. Personally, I think the whole thing with the buyer broker agreement is going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. You know, we've all run into, you know, like in Georgia, as an example, they don't take people out in Georgia without a buyer broker agreement. It just doesn't happen, right? Other states, you know, we take people out without one, but sometimes, you know, they jilt us, right? That's, you know, and again, it's not going to just be you asking for the buyer broker agreement. It's going to be everybody across the board. Let's just talk a little bit about, you know, kind of transitioning from one to the other. I know this is, you know, a question people will have. Okay, you went under agreement July 31st, right? You're under agreement July 31st, and then that, you know, co-broke data is stripped out of the MLS on August 1st. You're still protected, right? You, as long as, right, is whatever, it's going to be whatever day they took it out, as long as, you know, the contract was signed prior to that, the old rules will apply. But once it's out, then the new rules apply, right? And then, right, you're going under agreement on August 2nd and you don't have a buyer broker agreement signed, right? And they took that data out on August 1st, you potentially could be out of luck. If the seller's not willing to pay you, then you're not going to get paid. Just touch a little bit on fair housing. You know, there's been some talk about this. So again, we got to be careful, right? You know, because there's going to be more, you know, more negotiation, more, you know, different plans will kind of emerge, you know, flat fee, you know, maybe I'll work with a buyer for $7,500, you know, things like that. But you got to be really careful that you treat everyone the same in your business practices, especially as a seller. Oh, you know, oh, that person I like, so I'm willing to compensate their agent 2.5%. But this person, because of who they are, I don't like, and I'm not going to offer their agent anything. That would be problematic. Can't do that, right? You got to treat everybody fairly, everybody equally. All right. Again, the buyer broker agreement seems to get a lot of questions. I've touched upon it a little bit. You know, unfortunately, they're not out yet with the final, you know, at least what the, you know, state realtor associations are going to put forth. They're not out with those. You know, we always want to use like the state, you know, the state generated forms. I mean, it has, you know, a couple advantages. They've been scrutinized, they're standardized. And if we ever have a question, you know, in every state we have that legal hotline. It's a great resource. But as soon as you use anything that's not their form, they won't talk to you. They won't comment on it, right? So again, but those forms should be out, you know, shortly, right? So again, you're going to disclose, you know, what the rate of compensation will be, right? It can be a percentage, it can be a flat dollar amount. You know, again, things that, you know, buyer compensation shall be whatever seller is offering the buyer. Those are problematic, right? You can't do that, right? And again, you know, this was something we spent a lot of time on in the last training. Unfortunately, you're going to get, so if your buyer broker agreement is 2.5% and the seller is offering 3%, you only get 2.5%, right? Let me say that again, right? If your buyer broker agreement says 2.5% and the seller's offering 3%, you can only get 2.5%. Now, again, if the seller is only offering 2%, right? 2% is going to come from the seller, 0.5% from the buyer. You still got your 2.5%, right? So, and then it's going to include a statement that, you know, the buyer agent may not receive compensation from any source that exceeds the amount of rate agreed to with a buyer, right? We just kind of talked upon that, so potentially bonuses, a lot of new builds, they give you a bonus, right? Those may be problematic, right? Because you didn't put in there, it's going to be a percentage or a flat dollar amount. It's hard to include the bonus. Again, it can be the gamut. It can be limited service, it can be agency, it can be non-agency, it can be transactional, right? So what type of, representation are you entering into, with that buyer? So much of this is communication, transparency. I think one of the things we've been criticized over the years, is a lack of that, that sometimes, especially buyers, like not really knowing, how their agent was compensated. Those are things that got us in trouble, as a group, right? That's all going away. So much more transparency, much more, kind of openness in terms of, what we do and what we get paid for doing it. I did see like a touring agreement. If you go on Zillow, they have, they call it a touring agreement. I mean, it is very, very weak, and probably not compliant because it doesn't talk anything about, what we're to be paid, right? So again, I mean, we got to use, the buyer broker form. Again, I had a couple people send me, because again, the problem, or at least the fear, is how do I get that person to sign that buyer broker agreement? So the less teeth it has, right? Maybe the easier it is to do that. Agents that have used, like at Dalton Wade, we've kind of had an open policy, right? Meaning, if you want to use a buyer broker agreement, you can go for it, absolutely. But if you don't have to either. So whatever you thought was, ultimately best, for your business. Now, got to have that buyer broker agreement. It's mandatory, right? And as soon as that data is stripped out of the MLS, you got to get it, right? You're not supposed to be showing somebody, a property without it. And again, if everybody, meaning agents, if all the agents say the same thing, then there's really no choice for the consumer. They're going to have to, sign on with someone, right? So, what is your value proposition, right? All right, so some key dates going forward. So those additional forms, which I've been waiting, they were going to be out June 1st, then June 15th, then June 30th. And they're still, not really completely out yet, but they are coming and they will be out soon, right? Again, primarily the listing agreement and the buyer broker agreement. Those are the ones, we're waiting on. And then, so those are coming anytime now. And then again, from August 1st to August 17th, depending on your MLS, it's going to be different. They're all treating it differently. The co-broke information is going to be gone. And that's when you're going to need, the agreement from either the seller, right? How much he's going to pay you, or from the listing brokerage, how much they are going to pay, right? In terms of compensating you as the buyer's agent. And again, if they're not compensating, then you receive, your compensation from the buyer because you have that buyer broker agreement. All right. So again, right, a lot of this is going to come down, I think, to really explaining our value, really chatting, with both sellers and buyers, what we do. So, up on the Join Dalton Wade website, under the agent tab, there's a downloadable, editable very nice listing presentation you can use, right? And then we also have a buyer presentation. You want to have, I mean, obviously when we would get a listing, typically we go to the home, right? We have that listing presentation, right? Sometimes it's competitive, sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes they're only talking to you. But now that buyer presentation becomes really paramount, right? Because again, you're going to be asking them to sign something with you, right? So you want to make sure you're putting your best foot forward. A couple other things. So it is possible as buyer's agent to be compensated with a seller credit or seller concession, right? That's possible as well. I've heard some MLSs, again, hard to know until they do it. I've tried to call and find out some more information, but no one really tells you until it's actually there. But you may see a new field come up where the seller is also, now offering explicitly, that seller credit, right? That seller concession. Now, again, you can be paid as buyer's agent out of that seller's concession. Now, again, when you write that up, you can't say in the additional terms, right? Seller to pay $12,000 to buyer's agent as a seller's concession. Can't word it like that, right? Can be, seller to pay, for, prepaids, closing costs, non-allowables, kind of that standard verbiage, right? And then if, the buyer chooses to allocate part of that credit, right, to pay you as buyer's agent, they can do that, right? So again, I would be getting comfortable using that buyer broker agreement now. Don't wait till the last day, right? You got to get comfortable with that. You got to, be able to present it. You got to be able to talk to people about it. You got to let them know why you need it. Again, for many, it's not a big deal because that's how I mean, I know agents, they will not take somebody out or work with the buyer unless they have that signed. They're adamant about it. So now, we all have to do that. And then as I alluded to a little bit, how's this all going to go? Who's going to come out on top? Is it the listing agent? Maybe it's the buyer's agent because you got what the seller wants, a buyer. I don't know. We'll have to see. And then as we talked, potentially new compensation models could arise, or maybe the status quo continues. When I talk about new compensation models, flat fee, right? As I said, $7,500, it's what I'm going to charge you to work with me as your buyer's agent, right? But what's really important is this last bullet. What is your model? What is your model? What is your model? How are you going to be presenting, right? And again, it ties back to that listing presentation and that buyer's presentation, right? I'm going to be telling, any seller that they are out of their mind. They are crazy especially in this market, right? It's hard to find buyers. There aren't as many of them. You want to motivate that buyer agent, right? I mean, I've talked to buyer's agent. If there's no compensation offered, they're probably, not as excited about that property as they might have been, right? So you want to come up with what's your model, what's your pitch, how you're going to present yourself, right? And get good at it, practice it, use that buyer presentation, use that listing, presentation, and get good at it, get transparent, communicate your value. To me, the agents that are going to suffer are what I call the flim flam agents. That the agents, hopefully no one's, no one's on the call that's like this, but there's a group of agents out there. They want to get the most money for the least work. Those people, I believe, are going by the wayside. Communication, transparency. If you do that well, you will have no issues, no problems, with the new rules. All right, let me throw it out to questions and answers. Let's see here. I'll go up top, see if I can, kind of go through them. Hey, Melanie, thank you. Melanie says, thanks for keeping us updated. My pleasure. Hey, Patty, good to see you. Let's see. All right, any questions? I see a whole bunch of hellos. Let me get by the hellos. Thank you, Sky. She likes my blazer. I appreciate that. So, all right, let's see. I'm an AI assistant. That's good. Let's see. Is the buyer agreement just for that showing? It can be. Good question, Alexander. It can be just for, let's see, it can be just for that showing, but you probably don't want that, right? I mean, you probably want something a little bit more long term, right? Hey, test drive me for 30 days. Let me see you see how I do as your buyer's agent. And then if you do a great job, they're going to sign back up with you and extend that. So it can be for a day, it can be for one showing, or it can be, for much, much longer. Does this affect our existing listing commissions? Um, Great question. How you doing, Heidi? Um, Not today, it doesn't, but once that data is out of the MLS, no, it's not going to affect because the seller has already offered, right? To pay a co-broke fee, right? So now what's going to happen, Heidi, is you're going to have to communicate that, right? You're going to get, hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping this doesn't happen like this, meaning every showing those buyer's agent, how much you offering, how much you offering. That's going to be a lot of time and probably not that productive, right? But you're going to get questions, Heidi. Every listing agent is. It's going to be part of how it works now, right? Instead of them knowing what they're going to get paid, they're going to ask and they're going to ask, and you're going to have either, me, right? If it's in the listing agreement, right? Or Kevin, if it's in, Georgia, Alabama, or Tennessee, we're going to sign, right? We are going to sign and something that says, hey, Mr. Buyer Brokerage Agency, we are offering you compensation, right? And then that buyer agent is, knows they are going to, get paid. And then if we're the buyer's agent, we want that, right? So as soon as that data, so we're protected right up to the day that data is still in the MLS, but once it's gone, that's when those forms in terms of the, buyer agent commission need to be signed. So we're protected. Uh, Kurt asks, how will open houses work after August 17th? Well, again, this is the brokerage, right? The brokerage, has the listing agreement. So again, if they're offering compensation, right, then, whatever arrangement you're going to have with the listing agent, because again, Dalton Wade gets the total commission, right? Let's just say we're getting 5% and we're offering 2.5% to the buyer's agent. We can still do that, right? And you did an open house and you've met a buyer, right? We would get 5%, and then that listing agent probably is going to compensate you 2.5%. You may want to get something more in writing for them. One of the craziest things, at least in Florida, that I've seen is when and personally never do this because I think it's nuts. There's a listing by Keller Williams, and then there's a Coldwell Banker agent doing the open house. Now, if you're a Dalton Wade agent, you can do anybody else's open house. You can do that. But if it's our listing, it has to be a Dalton Wade agent, right? But again, if you're doing an open house for another brokerage, then you probably need that buyer, that commission addendum signed, because you can't be sure if you're putting in that offer, you're going to get compensated. All right, let's see. Kind of touched upon that, Ronnie. How does the buyer broker agreement work with open houses? Again, if it's within the brokerage, there isn't a need for one because we have the listing agreement, right? But if you're, if you're meeting somebody, right, and say you meet them at an open house, and then, that's not the house for them, and then you take them out to another house, right? You're going to start showing them properties. You need the buyer broker agreement signed. Hey, Dapo, how are you? What if the seller is not offering buyer agent commission? That is perfectly legal. That is perfectly fine. That has always been that way, right? If they're not, then they're not. Then if, then you're going to get compensated by your buyer. Or maybe that isn't the house for your buyer. Maybe your buyer doesn't want that house because of that. Hey, Maddie, how are you? Yeah, so anything in place now is in place, right? I mean, it's all going to get carried forward, right? If you have your listing agreement, it's still there, it's still going to work, it's still effective. The only thing now, right, is that buyer's agent is not going to be able to see what you're offering. So they may call you, or when they submit an offer, right, they may put in something asking for a certain level of compensation. And then there's could be a negotiation. There's going to definitely be more, more negotiating, no doubt about that. Sylvia says, my broker has been used buyer broker agreement. Yeah, I mean, again, like they're smart. I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, you're at risk. I mean, you've always been at risk. I mean, when you take a buyer out and there's no buyer broker agreement, I tell my story about, it's hard. I think what happens is sometimes agents are fearful, right, of asking for their buyer to sign it, right? Maybe they'll say no, and then what do I do? But now you got to explain it. You got to talk to them. Tell them, hey, this is not just me. This is a mandatory thing, right? So no matter who they work with, they're going to have to sign something. Hey, Glenda, how are you? Um, there are no, the main form, which is that buyer broker agreement, unfortunately has not come out yet. I mean, I can't believe they're taking this long, but I mean, it's any day. I mean, they said, originally around mid-June, then it was pushed back to, to June 30th. And, again, it isn't out as of today. So, I mean, I think the only action to take is to know this is coming, right? To know it's happening. Like one day you're gonna wake up, Glenda, I know, is in stellar MLS, right? And that data is gonna be gone. And then you're gonna need that buyer broker agreement, right? I mean, if you're under agreement before, you're fine. Right. But again, I think you want to get prepped, you want to talk to your buyers, you want to start asking for it, you want to practice. You want to get used to delivering that buyer, broker, presentation. Hey, Alicia, how are you? So they are in, typically they're found in interactive forms. So there's a folder, interactive forms. They are going to be in there. If you ever have any difficulty, you can just call Dalton Wade support and they'll point you in the right direction. Yep, we are going to have Shani is asking about, will there be a recording? Yep, this is being recorded. We will have it up on the Join Dalton Wade website, probably, late tomorrow afternoon. It'll be under the training tab. Click around and you'll find it. Can the seller broker agreement be an attachment in MLS? Hey, Melanie. So meaning, kind of what they're offering for compensation. I'm assuming that's what you mean, what the seller is offering. No, nope, they're not going to allow that. So that, it can't be in the realtor remarks. It can't be an attachment. It can't be anywhere near MLS. Now, again, could there be third-party websites that pop up where this data is displayed? That is possible. Um, so Glenda, no, I mean, I think what you're going to try, I mean, you can, I mean, it's certainly possible, to have somebody sign what I would call as a showing agreement, right? Just for that one showing, but you don't really want that. I mean, because then, I know they would love you and they would carry on and use you again and continue to work with you, but you want to, again, I think you want to think about this. This is what I meant by like, what is your plan? What is your plan? I don't know if she's here tonight, but Carla, this is a couple months back. We were talking about this. Her plan, I don't know if it's changed. She's going to sign some 14 days, right? That she's going to sign them up for 14 days and she is going to see how they like her, right? Maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 60 days, right? I think the harder and the longer you ask somebody to sign on with you. Now, again, let's say, it's your brother's good friend and he's recommended you. Well, he's probably, already got a good reference point, probably willing to sign for longer. Somebody you meet online, probably not, maybe something shorter would be more applicable. You gotta test this stuff out. You gotta learn. You gotta see what people, because again, right, you are not the only one asking them for that buyer broker agreement. I mean, they are not really going to be able to look at any homes without having it with somebody. So again, I think you want, again, you can have one for one showing. That would not be what I would, be trying to accomplish. Hey, Nitin, yep, we're going to have this recorded. Sharon says she would call to find out. Is that about the buyer agent compensation? It is possible to do that. I mean, we are not, currently anticipating doing that. Because again, if it's just our listings, I mean, I'll check on that. It's a good question. Maybe that's a place, you could send somebody to, to take a look so they're not continually calling. I think there's going to be a lot more, kind of interaction for the listing agent, right? There's going to be more conversations, more discussions. Absolutely. So Marino was asking, how is this going to work? Will the buyer's agent agreement work towards securing a commission? Absolutely. If the listing agent will not pay the requested commission, right? So think of it like this. What I would be doing is, I am asking, I'm submitting an offer, right? With, hey, you need to pay me 2%, 2.5%, 7,500, 8, 9, whatever, whatever your deal is with your buyer, right? So that the seller compensates you. But if they don't and they say no, then you have that buyer broker agreement to fall back on and you'll be compensated by your buyer. Georgette, how are you? See, look, listen to what Gigi says. I'm not worried about it anymore, right? What seller compensation will be. She's not worried. I have all my buyers sign the buyer broker agreement. Otherwise, I won't write that. That is the attitude, right? That's what's going to happen. Many agents are already doing that, right? Because, get jilted a few times. Have I ever been jilted by a buyer? Yeah. And then I started using the buyer broker agreement. That's the thing, right? As I said, some places they don't take you out without one. So that's awesome. Absolutely. Absolutely, Kim. So we better keep a printout of the MLS showing, what the the co-bro compensation is. Yeah, absolutely. If you have an offer, right? If you have an offer put in, print that out, right? You're under agreement, then we're good. But as soon as that stuff out there, excuse me, as soon as that data is gone, then you need, the commission agreement. No, hey Rakesh, no, you can't. You can't, no, can't use up to, right? It has to be a definitive either dollar amount or percentage, right? No, no up to, no, whatever the seller is paying or, right, again, no, they're pretty firm on that, so can't do that. What if the seller is offering a bonus commission on top of the commission? Great question. You're not going to get the bonus, unfortunately. You're not going to get the bonus. Unless, you have something that's like, oh, I'm getting 3.5% or 3%, and now they're offering 2% plus, $6,000 bonus, which is 1%, then you would get it, right? You can't receive more than what's on that buyer broker agreement. You're capped, like whatever's on that buyer broker agreement, you are capped at that amount. That is the most you can receive. Now, who pays you that could all be paid by the seller, or a portion could be paid by the seller, and then the balance paid by the broker's agent. Hey Andrea, how are you? No, no, I mean, I know you have a really good buyer broker agreement. You're covered, Andrea. Nothing to worry about there. Again, what you're going to need potentially is that commission agreement, right? Because we don't want our buyers paying if we don't have to. We want the seller to pay. Trust me, I at least what I've heard, most agents, most listing agents are going to communicate to their client, you know, hey, you need to compensate that buyer, especially in this market, right? We're in a, I don't want to say we're in a, it's not like it was. That's all I'll say. But Andrea, you're good with what you have. You don't need to get them to sign something else. Yeah, I don't, Melanie, I don't think that's gonna work. It's a definitive number. It's nothing above. This will be split. Whatever you have on that buyer broker agreement, that is your cap. That is your cap in terms of what you can receive. Well, that's possible. Hey, Terry, how are you? So there's one that looks like it's already been taken out. FMLS is in Georgia. So again, you would need those, compensation agreements right now. Anytime you show a property, and you probably need the buyer broker agreement signed now, because the risk is without the buyer broker agreement, and then if show them a property, and then they want to put an offer in and that person's not paying a commission and you don't have the buyer broker agreement, there's nobody to compensate you. Yeah, I do too. I can't believe they've been futzing around. Georgette is asking about the forms. I mean, it's disappointing, quite honestly, that they don't have those out yet. Let's see. Well, again, a couple of them are out, which is the compensation agreement. So again, I think the reason why the forms aren't out yet, Tony, is because they haven't taken the data. I guarantee you, I would be shocked if they take the data, the compensation, the buyer compensation data, and not have those forms out. That is not going to happen. So those forms will be out prior to them removing the data. Hey, Yunfei. Yep, it's in, absolutely, it's in dot loop for sure. Hey, Nicole, how to prevent buyers from going to listing agent. Listing agent will have, the listing agent doesn't need a buyer broker agreement because they're already compensated, right? Now, again, if you have the buyer broker agreement, right, then it doesn't really matter because your buyer is now committed to work with you. If they work with another agent and they end up purchasing something, we can go after them for our commission. So that's not going to happen. So buyers agents, excuse me, listing agents, I don't anticipate them getting, they don't need a buyer broker agreement. They don't need a buyer. Remember and again, there's confusion sometimes. So if and I see this all the time, I mean, with experienced agents, we'll get the listing agreement in, and it'll say, you know, there's section 8. How much is Dalton Wade getting? Oh, we're getting 3%. And then how much are we paying out? Oh, we're paying out 3%. So basically, when an agent does that, sets up the listing agreement that way, they're working for zero. How that should have been, let's just say we're splitting the commission, 6% goes to Dalton Wade, right? And out of that 6%, 3% is paid to the buyer's broker's agent. So they don't need a listing agent doesn't need a buyer broker agreement for their property because the listing agreement covers that. And in that example I just gave, they would get 6%. Yeah, Glenda, I agree. I mean, I'm kind of shocked they haven't well, everybody here on this, on this webinar knows our job is not easy money. I would everybody know. I mean, we do this, that is the problem. They don't, most, bureaucrats, the judge, the jury, they don't know what we do, and deals fall apart. And then, right? I mean, and the stuff we have to go, right? They don't know that. They're not in it like that. They just think they've watched too many too many reality TV shows. And they think it's all easy money, and it's the farthest from that. So I agree with you. Hey, Heidi, I think we've answered that. Does this affect the commission on our current listings? No, not at all. What happens when a family member is looking who is going to sign? Meaning a family member is looking for, like, their parent or someone like that. I'm sure that's probably what you're referring to. Yeah, I mean, I think whoever is, submitting the offer, whoever's name, whatever buyer's name is on that offer, their name should be on that buyer broker agreement, right? Because without it, again, it's like we don't have anything. That is a great question, Pedro. I'm going to do that. I'm going to take you up on that, especially with internet leads. We'll do that. Let's say we'll do that in 2 weeks. We'll just have, kind of a whole training just on how to deliver that buyer broker agreement. I think that's certainly worthwhile and a good thing. So you got my word. We'll do that. Um, Oh, I'm glad someone likes it here. Morelli, how are you? Thank you for the nice words. How do you handle a walk-in at an open house? Can a listing agent show the property? Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Roy, absolutely. I think we touched upon that. Again, the listing agreement covers that. The only time it wouldn't is if you're doing an open house, right, for a different brokerage. Then you would need that buyer broker agreement from that buyer because you're not part of that brokerage. I think we touched upon that. Current listings. Yep, it remains the same until the contract ends. Let's see. It's in there. I mean, we looked. Terry, I will have someone point it to you, or give Dalton Wade support a call tomorrow morning. And they'll point you, because the forms I had, we had them all. So it should be there. I'm not just looking in the right spot, but we'll get that figured out for you. Hey, Holly, how are you? My suggestion is you need that buyer broker agreement. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. There's nothing else. There's no, they have a touring agreement, which personally, when I looked at, doesn't comply. It doesn't comply. So yeah, it's difficult, I think, for Zillow agents. Anybody we're meeting, we meet a lot of people online. I mean, it happens. So, you're just going to have to explain to them how it now works and what the requirements are. And again, I would be telling people, hey, this is not me. This is every single agent you are going to speak with. And here's what I'm going to do for you. Here's how I'm going to help you. Here's what I do. Right. I think that is going to be the extra work. And I think it's a good thing. I think, so many times we just meet people, we show them and we answer their questions, and then they might ask you, are you the listing agent? They don't even know who you are. That all's going away. That's all going away. So again, transparency, communication, explaining, right? Selling yourself, just like when you go on a listing presentation, right? Sometimes you're the only one they're talking to. Sometimes, they're talking to two or three agents. So you want to, present yourself as strongly as possible. Same with this. Same with this. Especially, it's going to be a little harder, with internet leads, but we got to work through it. Hey, Jack, how are you? Absolutely. Yep. Jack says if we have a listing agreement that expires, say in December, and offers a co-broke, can they change the co-broke amount after August 17th? That is a good question. Again, I think we would have to agree to that. The listing agreement, sometimes I'll have like an agent that's having difficulty with a client and I don't want to work with them anymore. I'm not work. No, it's called bilateral. Bilateral, not unilateral. Unilateral means one person or one can cancel. Bilateral, both have to agree. Meaning, so if you agree and your client agrees, then there's no issue. But if you say, oh, we signed this, I'm not agreeing, then it doesn't change. Hey, Thad, absolutely not. No, can a listing agent put a commission rate in the realtor remarks? Let me just say one thing. So I think how I would like everybody to think about this. Unfortunately, we are not out of the woods. We are not out of the woods. I'm going to say that again. We are not out of the woods. I've done a lot of research on this. I kept myself very up to date on this. All this, the justice, the Justice Department, they don't like us realtors. I don't know why, but they don't. And if they had it their way, this is how this would work. The seller would be outlawed from paying the buyer's agent. Outlawed against the law. Against the law. Can't pay anything to a buyer's agent. That's what they want. That's what they want. And they are still mucking around. They are still investigating. They could come in 3 months after the settlement and say, we don't like it. This isn't good enough. So we have to comply with the spirit of the law, of what they're wanting us to do, which is more transparency, communicating. But if people are very, very ingenious, right? And they come up with ways, but if really those ways are kind of circumventing the intent of what everyone is trying to have happen here, that's going to be a problem potentially. So keep that in the back of your mind, right? Keep that in the back of your mind, because if that happened, that would be bad. That would be really bad. So the settlement, while some change, something different, personally, I think it's good. I think it creates more transparency in what we do, right? Which is always a good thing. I think we will now communicate better, right? There'll be some disclosures telling people right up front, very explicitly, real estate commissions are negotiable. It's all good. Hey Sheila, how are you? No, we don't. We're waiting on that form to come out from, Florida Realtors and all the Realtor associations. So it is not out yet, but as soon as it is, we will get that out to everybody, let everyone know. We're gonna kind of, hopefully it'll be out in the next couple weeks so we can look at it when we do that, when we do that training on how to present it, how to talk to clients about it. Delivery, that's going to be important. Again, you want to get good at it. I remember, like, the first listing presentation I ever did, I was terrible, terrible, but I got better, right? Practice, maybe deliver it to your significant other. Donald has a really good question. How are you, Donald? Does the broker have to sign the buyer broker every time, or can we sign it? That is one I'm going to check on, and I will be back to everybody. We'll probably put a post up in the Facebook group, but I'll specifically let you know. That's a great question. I believe, you'll be able to sign it right as as the agent. I'm anticipating that's what it'll be, but I want to double check on that for you. Hey Glenn and Carolyn, how are you? That is not happening. That is not happening. Carol and I will be uploading the seller broker agreement as an attachment, and you can't do that. Can't do that. Can't do that. That is circumventing what they're trying to, have happen here. And again, a lot of this has arisen from, and again, if agents and agents sorting the listings by which listings pay the most, agents not showing, and I understand why. Like, why would you show somebody something that isn't paying a commission? So by having the buyer broker agreement signed, you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry. So I don't think that's going to work. Absolutely. Janet said, when we text the listing agent to arrange the show, can't we ask? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, you can do that. So Georges, I think that building a good relationship, we want to do that all the time. But I think if they start signing a buyer broker agreement with multiple agents for a specific property, that is going to be a mess. That is going to be a mess. And I would, you need again to be asking your buyers, have they signed this with anyone else? Right? Because that is an ethics violation, right? If they haven't signed one, then you can work with them right now, meaning now. But going forward, once this is fully implemented, every buyer should have signed that with somebody. So if they have a enforced buyer broker agreement with somebody else, you can't be signing them up. You can't be showing them. Can't do it. Hey Laura, how are you? Not be able to use seller contribution. I'm not sure what IPC is instead. I have heard and I have spoken, to legal. The seller concession will be able to be used, to pay the buyer agent commission. 99% certain on that. The only thing is when you write up that seller concession, right, seller to pay, $10,000 of, buyer closing costs, prepaid, non-allowables, you can't specifically say buyer broker commission. Has to be left general. And then if that's what they choose to use to pay us, then that's fine. But again, you have the buyer broker agreement. So if they don't use it, then they owe us the money. Hey, Kim. I mean, again, I'm just telling you my own personal opinion. I mean, again, you can call every listing agent and ask, or I think, Janet had mentioned about texting. You can certainly do that and find out. But again, we show a lot of properties, most of them, they don't offer on, but if they're offering zero, um, then no, we're not out of luck. The buyer is then having to pay us. Again, I could be wrong, but I mean, again, what are we seeing now? Like, what are we seeing now in MLS? How many zero commissions are there? There's more than there ever was, but it's not prevalent. It's not really right. Most are still offering, and I think that is going to continue because it's in the best interest of the seller. I think what a lot of people are forgetting, you can put a listing up for $99 and offer 3% to the buyer's agent. Maybe that's what happens. Maybe listing agents go away. I don't know. Who knows? We'll have to see. We'll have to see. Thank you, Georgette. Right. So Georgette is kind of re-emphasizing that's why you're buying, right? If you think about it, it makes perfect sense. You have the buyer sign that agreement, you're getting paid, right? Then you're going to try for your buyer to have the seller pay it. And I'm thinking the vast majority will. The vast majority. Sheila says, so I have a concern if a seller isn't paying on a property my client really likes and they don't want the house because they would have to pay. No, I don't believe, no, they didn't like it that much to want to then pay you, right? It didn't work for them in the end, right? And again, maybe, so when they say the seller isn't paying, I mean, again, kind of what I think it's going to go is, well, what's the offer? What's the offer? Right? What's the offer? So it's all got to be negotiated now. Heidi says, "Will our listing on the MLS just change, or do we? No, it's just going to disappear. Like those fields, transaction broker, single agent, non-brokerage relationship. Those three fields, where it shows like 2% minus 395 or whatever, right, or whatever it says in there. Those are no longer there. They're gone. They're just not there." No, no, no. Hey, Kathy, I think we've hit upon this before. Nope. So Kat's asking again about that open house. No, you don't need a buyer broker agreement, for your listing. Then it would be the same as if, now, like if they deal directly with the listing agent. But if you want to say they don't say like you really connected with them and, you hit it off and they like you and they want to work with you and you say, hey, let's go look at some properties on Tuesday. And that first showing on Tuesday, you need that buyer broker agreement. Maybe you need it signed before. So if it's your listing, right? And again, when I say your listing, they're actually Phil's listings, right? They're Dalton Wade's listings, right? And if we have two agents that work at Dalton Wade, then we figure it out. So if it's your listing, if it's Dalton Wade's listings, we're covered. We're already covered by what's in the listing agreement. But as soon as you go and show them another property, that's when you need the buyer broker agreement. I mean, that is all, Kim, that is always the concern. That is always the concern. But I think, meaning that the buyers don't have the dollars to pay me, right? So again, what you're going to tell them is that you're going to find them a home where they don't have to pay, right? Again, remember what I said. What would be terrible is if they, unilaterally said the seller cannot pay the buyer's agent anything. That's like, lights out, game changer. That's not what's happening here. It's not what's happening here. Not, hey, Kurt, not easy at all. In fact, not at all. That is not happening. We will pursue that. And that's why Andrea has got a, we may end up using her. She got a really great buyer broker agreement with some teeth, meaning like, the way that buyer broker agreement is written now, like if they jilt us to collect the money, right, to take them to court, to sue them, to get an attorney, becomes prohibitive. But it's, in Andrea's agreement, it says the buyer then pays not only our commission, but all our expenses. Again, I think how this is going to go is that when you're negotiating, you're going to come back and the buyer is going to say, hey, I like it. I'm willing to pay you, they're going to pay two and I owe you two and a half. I'm good with a half. Oh, they're not offering anything. It's not the house for me. It's not the house for me. Hey, Regina. Well, I believe it is. I mean, again, so let me just clarify. The fact that the buyer broker agreement is mandatory is a NAR MLS thing, right? It is a NAR, it is not a FREC rule or a, North Carolina Real Estate Commission rule. It is none of that. It is an MLS NAR rule, right? So, and it is mandatory. It is mandatory. Now, again, could they work with somebody that's not part of NAR and not have to sign a buyer broker agreement? Yeah, they can do that. But why would it? I think we have to get out of our minds that like the buyer broker agreement is a bad thing. It's a good thing. It protects us. It protects us. We've heard from several agents, they don't take somebody out without it. So if everybody requires it, then it just becomes the way it is. That's what's going to happen. Let's see, if buyer doesn't want to sign and he requires me to call who is giving call the listing, not, then you can't work with them. Unfortunately, you can't work with them. Can't work with them. But again, right, the next realtor they meet, they're gonna like it's everybody's gonna now be requiring this. So there's like, well, then maybe they just want to deal with a listing agent. They can do that. But really, is the listing agent, right, got their interest in heart? Is the listing agent really trying to make sure they get that house for the least amount of money? Is the listing agent really representing them? That's what I would be talking about to, buyers that struggle with this, right? Real estate's tricky. Again, somebody who's bought four or five houses, maybe it's less important to have a buyer's agent. I still think it's important, but somebody that's a first time home buyer, somebody that's moving somewhere and going into that market for the first time, they are crazy not to have a buyer's agent. Crazy. I've seen buyers that dealt with the listing agent, like, I've come in later and get their listing and they got taken to the cleaners, abused, overpaid. Hey, Thad, he's asking about the, what can we attach? Nope, nothing can be in the MLS, really. There can be no forms, no attachment, no realtor remarks, right? That all kind of is circumventing. So Patty thinks everybody's going to go to the listing agent. Well, I don't know. We'll have to see how that works. Maybe, I mean, I think in the end, but again, think of it like this, right? What's the listing agent getting? Are they getting 5 or 6%? And then what I'm afraid of is they're going to be like unscrupulous listing agents that charge 5 or 6%, right? And then they don't want to offer anything. They're going to like clean up, clean up. But is that really in the best interest of that client? I don't know. Personally, I think there's a good chance. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I think the listing agent has the potential to be de-emphasized. De-emphasized. What does a listing agent do? We've all dealt with those flat fee. I mean, again, both sides are important. So we have to see. Like, I remember, does anybody remember TRID? That was probably, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. There was all this stuff about, they were changing the lending, right? And the disclosures and the requirements, and everybody's nervous and what's going to happen. It's going to take like 60 days, 90 days to close. It's a disaster. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. It was business as usual. That's what my gut is telling me here. Hey Denise, in my last two closings, even in the current system, I found out only from finally seeing the Alta that the listing agent was to receive much more compensation than the buyer's agent, was. With the new system, when the seller agent tells you how much you will receive, do you have a right to ask them how much they will receive? You really shouldn't even care, because again, really, if you take this a step back, what's important now, right? Think of the concept, right? The buyer, you're working for the buyer. The buyer is compensating you. You are going to agree with them how much that compensation is. Maybe there's somebody, I'm going to pay you 1%. Well, no, I do so much more work, that's really, you're better off with somebody else. And by the way, you get what you pay for, right? So I wouldn't even care. I mean, it's a little, again, I think, what ends up happening, and I think a lot of this is going to go away. Hopefully it will, is that listing agent shoves that listing agreement in front of that client and says 6% for Dalton Wade, 2% for the buyer's agent. They don't ask anything about it. And the listing agent doesn't tell them anything. That's gonna, get called out now, because that seller is going to get offers, potentially where, you know, the buyer's agent is asking for more. Oh, well, maybe I'm paying you too much. Again, we have to see. But I wouldn't care. It really is none of our business. But it does make you awake to, hey, the listing agent does control the commission, right? So, most agents, I think the better practice is to split it, but that doesn't always happen. That was a good question. Sergey wants to know why Denise is worried about somebody else's money. Well, probably Sergey is like rubbing her the wrong way. I'm guessing, because it would rub me. I think it rubs everybody the wrong way, unless you're the listing agent, you're getting more. Then maybe not, right? But again, I think we all, it's cooperation, it's working together, it's trying to incentivize buyers agents, to promote that house. Hey, Olga, absolutely, you can charge 8%. You can charge 10% as listing. It is all negotiable, right? It's all negotiable. Everything's negotiable. They may not like that. They may not want to do that. They may not want to pay 8%. We just had one, we don't have the exact numbers, what Denise was mentioning, but, obviously the listing agent got more there. I don't know, like an astute client seller might say, that's not right. So you can negotiate whatever you can negotiate. You can negotiate 6% for you, 1% for the buyer's agent. Is that in the best interest of the seller? I don't think so. But maybe you're able to explain it and you tell them how much you're going to do, and right, everything's negotiable. That's what they want, right? Now so much of it was hidden. So now it's negotiable both ways, less and more. If we have a listing before, we are explaining the buyer's agent negotiate 2% with their client. Absolutely. That is exactly how it works. That's exactly how it works. So again, we talked about the buyer's agent is capped at how much they're getting. So remember, and I've said this, again, it is not straightforward. This is confusing. I mean, it is. I can just tell you from the number of listing agreements we get where it's like 3 and 3 or 2.5, 2.5. The agent didn't understand, like, how it works is the seller pays the listing brokerage. And then the listing brokerage out of those funds pays the buyer's agent. Well, now the buyer is capped at 2%, so they still owe us 5%. That's a great question. Hey, Andrea, good to see you. Yep, we will have that replay up, you know, probably midday tomorrow. It'll be on the Join Dalton Wade website. If you have trouble finding it, just email me, text me, and I'll send you the link. But we are recording it and it will be up there. Let's see. Uh, thank you, Mike. How are you? I guess that's a good one. That is a really good one. Now, there can be, right? Dalton Wade, I think we're in now close to 40 different MLSs, right? So they're all different. They're all different. I did call the legal hotline. They don't really know. I called Stellar. I got some, like, kind of run around answer. So we don't know. We don't know. I mean, I think you'll definitely see it in some. Will it be in everyone? It's hard to know. But I think that's a great addition, right? To let, now again, you can put in the realtor remarks, the public remarks, I mean, that's always been permissible, right? To talk about, the seller credit, seller concession. But is there going to be a specific field? There could be. I mean, there will be in some, but I can't tell you which MLS is at the moment. Um, you know, Denise said is a great question. If they're taking more before the change, will it get worse afterwards? I have no idea. Personally, I think so. One of the things, I'm just one person with one opinion, right? One of the things that caused all this is taking sellers to the cleaners, abusing them, abusing them. And I think that whole, 4%, 2%, 3%, 2%, right? Where the listing, why does the listing agent make more? I think they make more because maybe they can, or maybe they could convince their client to sign it. Is it the best thing for the client? I'm all about fair, right? Let's, right? We're trying to help our clients sell their house. That's the goal. What's the best way to do that? Now, 4 and 2, is that the best way to do that? I don't know. It doesn't seem like, I personally, I would never do that. I would never do that. But, I know it happens at Dalton Wade. I see the listing agreements. I think it's a good thing. One of the good things at Dalton Wade is we let you run your business. No, hey, Nicole, no, no, no. I think we've explained this, so no, the listing agent doesn't need, a buyer broker agreement for their listing. It's only if, like, one of my strategies when I was a listing agent is like, oh, I met you and you didn't like my property, but they liked me. I'm a likable guy, and I got them and I sold them something else. Now, as soon as I took them right to a different property, I need that buyer broker agreement. Absolutely. Hey, Cassandra, how are you? Absolutely. I mean, again, we're going to find out, right? We're still in like kind of the theory stage of all this, right? Maybe we find, oh, it's just way too much work to call every listing agent and ask, what are they offering? Or, I think Janet mentioned about, texting. Maybe that works. We'll figure this out, right? But it's going to be some personal preference. My preference would be, hey, I'm going to show them around. If they like a property, then I'm going to find out. But, that may not be someone else's preference. They may want to know before they go. All right, a few more questions. I think we've hit most of them. Hey, Mike. Yeah, I mean, Mike asks, what happens when you show a property and the buyers love it, and then you go to find out that they're only offering a very small, concession, right? Don't you run the risk of, upsetting the buyer because of it? They're gonna have to come up with a difference. Well, again, if they love the house, right, then maybe it doesn't upset them, right? No, nobody works for free, right? And I think this is where we go back to the value, right? I mean, do you think, like, let's just say as an example, that buyer doesn't have an agent and it's a competitive situation. Does that buyer know to maybe put in an escalation clause? Right? Everybody know what that is. My buyer will pay $5,000 more than your top offer up to this. They have no clue. No clue. Those are the things we need to communicate. Those are the things, where we have to show our expertise and be able to communicate that. That's really, I think, where kind of where the rubber hits the road. Let's see, Laura, will the buyer broker agreement become part mandatory and required to close, or will that just be a separate agreement? If the buyer doesn't have enough money to close, the buyer's agent pay gets cut. Um, that's a good question. That's a good question. Possibly, but I mean, let me ask you this now. Like, I mean, I know I had a few when I was out there where, yeah, I had to kick in some of my commission to make it happen. My whole thing, right? I'll never, one of my better stories, I think, and hopefully, I'll tie this in, you know, one brokerage, very, they're the attitude, right? Of, I think, what got us in trouble. Screw the customer, take as much money from people as you can, enrich yourself. So we have a deal and it's 6%. We're the listing brokerage. And so each agent's getting 15 grand and they do the inspection and there's 10 grand that needs to come from somewhere. And the only place it can come from is out of the agent's commission. So the Dalton Wade agent, like, hey, can I do this? Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's get it done. Other brokerage, no, we don't do that. So they were willing to like crater the deal because they wouldn't come off their commission. So potentially you could do that, Laura. You could crater the deal. And I would back you, but I don't think that's what you would do. I think my whole thing is let's get that deal done. Let's get that closed and let me move on to somebody else. Because if that deal craters, you don't know if that buyer is going to work with you again. You don't know what's going to happen. So hopefully that answers your question. So again, there's always negotiation with our commission. We don't like to do it. We don't want to do it, but sometimes to get it done, we got to do it. It's the only way. And again, it's a choice, right? It's a choice. That brokerage, they weren't going that way. No way. That is their brokerage policy. I know it. That's just how they roll. Here, if you want to do that, I support you. If you don't want to do it, I support you as well. Hey, Isabel, what if they sign a buyer at every open house? You don't, all right, let's get, we've had this, this is, they don't have to sign a buyer broker agreement at an open house, right? It is Dalton Wade's open house. If you're conducting a Dalton Wade open house, they don't have to sign a buyer broker agreement. What you might do, right, and what I would advise you to do is ask the listing agent, right? If it's your listing, then you get the entire commission. You don't need a buyer broker agreement. But if you're doing that open house for another agent and it's not your listing, then you need to, hey, I'm going to bring you a buyer. What do I get? Rakesh says silver lining. I like how he thinks, right? Silver lining. Other agents can't swipe your buyers. There you go. We'll be fine. Work harder and work smarter. That's what it is, right? All this craziness, right? Oh, are you, it all goes away. It all goes away. Now you have commitment. That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. I mean, they're, again, showing time. Again, there's going to be no transmission of the data from MLS because the MLS isn't going to show it. But yeah, showing time, absolutely. That's a possibility. Hey, they charge you $3 to put in the data. I don't know. That would work. Hey, Rob, how are you? I agree with you 100%. The previous system, I thought was awesome. It worked. I don't know why they're mucking around with it, but, unfortunately, again, I think it goes back to just the general public doesn't really know what we do, how much work this all is. They just think, oh, you know, you're getting X. I think where you might see some pushback is on the higher end, those more expensive properties, 1 million and up, where the buyer agent's getting 30 grand, 45 grand. There may be some pushback there. We'll see. All right, a few more questions. Let's see. Let's see. Hey, Nora, I'm showing land owned by a builder and he's going to build a custom home on the land. Do I need to have the buyer sign? Well, I mean, if you feel confident that you're going to get paid, then no. But if you feel like even 1% unsure, it's always safer to have that, then it's the other thing it does too, Nora, is that then there's no confusion. Oh, I thought you were getting 2%. No, no. When it's in writing, that's why in real estate everything needs to be in writing, right? Statute of frauds, right? Because things get confusing and people don't remember things. And so always better to get it in writing. I don't necessarily think you have to notify them. Nope, I don't. I mean, if they ask, certainly you're going to tell them. I mean, I'm sure, we're not hearing as much, when this first broke and the lawsuit and the settlement, I mean, it was all over the news. It's definitely kind of quieted down. I don't know what you guys are hearing out there. But no, I don't think you have to. I mean, if somebody asks, like, oh, I hear there's some changes, then, you want to be up to speed and be able to explain to them. Hey, Andrew. Well, again, I mean, the assumption is that that person has a buyer broker agreement. Like as the listing agent, you don't really care. You don't care. The whole buyer broker agreement thing is to protect the buyer, broker, right? That agent. Because again, without it, you are, in violation, right? I mean, I don't know how they're going to police it or whatever, if they even will police it, but technically, you have an MLS violation. And then the biggest thing though is you won't get paid. You won't get paid, meaning the buyer's agent. So the selling agent probably doesn't really care and doesn't really need to know. It just should be assumed that they have it. Donald has a good question. If we use the down payment programs, can some of that money be used for our commission? Phil knows a lot. He knows a lot, but he does not know that answer. Ask your lender. Ask your lender. They're going to be much more knowledgeable about that than I am. And, put it up in the Facebook group, what you learn. I mean, it's a good one, right? Again, whatever we can use, to pay that buyer agent, right, is a good thing. Hey Elaine, how are you? Nope, it really is. The drop dead date is August 17th. So every MLS is different. We did hear from someone in Georgia that the data is already out. In one particular, it's called FMLS, already gone. I got a notice, I believe it's the Southwest Florida MLS, August 1st. They're removing it. So once that data is removed, right, then we're going to the new way. The new way is I need to find out from the listing agent what they're paying, if anything, and I need to have a buyer broker agreement signed. That way, if they're not offering anything, I still get paid. But up until that date, we can operate under the old system. Hey, Yasmin, how are you? Any of you hear the buyers are going to be able to finance the buyer's agent commission? I did hear that VA, is now allowing, the agent to be paid. So that's positive. I don't know about, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We may hear more. Um, so Kim says she hasn't heard. I know there was something with, with VA, because with VA, you couldn't charge them anything, right? So that has been rescinded. So that, now, a VA buyer can pay. I don't know if they can roll it into the loan. I don't believe that's happened yet. And then conventional and FHA, again, same thing. I'm not sure if they can roll it into the loan. They could roll it into the loan as a seller's concession, right? If the seller is offering a concession, they can use that, roll that into the loan. Hey, Isabel, then they're not the smartest buyer, right? If you have two buyer broker agreements out there, you potentially run the risk of having to pay two agents, right? And then again, I think it's important because we've had this question a couple times, you know, you got to ask, hey, have you signed on with anybody else? If they say no, then, they're a free agent and you can sign them up. If not, then you probably shouldn't be working with them. Tony says, but what about builders offering a bonus on top of the commission to the buyer's agent? If buyer decides on new construction, do we write up a new buyer broker agreement? Um, I think that, I mean, obviously you can always modify it and change it. I think where, you run into problems. So again, it can't be, 2.5% plus bonus. That's not going to work. It has to be either 2.5% or a dollar amount. So bonuses may be harder to come by, quite honestly. Let's see, Cassandra, so is it possible an agent could get paid commission from seller or buyer? Nope, it is absolutely possible. You could get paid by both. Here's the example, right? You have a buyer broker agreement, 2.5%. The seller is offering 2%. The other 0.5% comes from the buyer. So you got paid from both. Seller offering 3%. Then you can't, then you're only getting 2.5%. Whatever is on that buyer broker agreement is the most you can receive. But you can be paid by both. But the most you can receive is what's on that buyer broker agreement. Absolutely. If your buyer broker says 3%, but sellers are offering 2.5%, can you accept less? Yes, you would do like a modification of that buyer broker agreement, and now it's 2.5%. So that you can do. So you can always accept less. You just can't get more. All right, let's see. So if commission is negotiated at time of offer and neither the seller nor the buyer agreeing to pay the commission, are we obligated to make the offer anyways, or can we just refuse to work for free? Okay, so Joanna, this is a great question. There is no working for free. There is no working for free. Let me say that one more time. There is no working for free. Why? Here's why. You cannot have taken that buyer out without that buyer broker agreement. Can't take somebody out. Once that commission data is out of the MLS no later than August 17th, you are not showing anybody a property that's a buyer without a buyer broker agreement. So you're always guaranteed, even if you think like that, like, I'm going to get that, I have to get it, I'm required to get it, you're always going to be compensated. Let's see. Heidi says, can negotiate with the buyer after you decided the commission? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a modification, right? Again, both parties have to agree, you have to agree, they have to agree. If everybody agrees, then we can change it. Buyer broker's going to have to be reasonable because the buyers will not want to most likely pay it. So we are forced to keep it lower because we cannot receive more than it says, even if the seller is paying more. So unfair. The buyers don't have money now and most need closing costs too. Right. So again, what we're going to hope in that situation, Laura, hopefully what happens is you get it through a concession. Right? I mean, the seller ended up paying through a concession as opposed to them offering, and us getting, that buyer broker commission agreement. I find it a little unfair. I do agree with you that if, the seller is offering more and we have, say 2.5 and we don't get that does seem incorrect to me, but I don't make the rules. I just try to, help everybody understand them. All right, let's see. Kayla, how are you, Kayla? So the seller to buyer broker new form is a form to be signed along with the listing agreement. Nope, 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 nope. No, that's not correct. So again, think of it like this. So the listing agreement probably is not going to change much. I think all that it really is going to change is going to say, commissions are negotiable in big black bold print, right? And they're not set by state law. That's going to change, but nothing else is going to change, right? Seller offers 6%, 3% goes to the buyer's agent. Same as it is now, except now the data we can put in MLS. Now we can't do that anymore. So the buyer broker form, right, is when you're working with a buyer, right? when you're working with a buyer. So just think of the buyer broker agreement like a listing agreement, except it's for a buyer. All right, Christine has summarized everything nicely. Let's see, take review update forms as they are released. Absolutely. So we're waiting on them to get those forms out, so we really kind of know a little bit more. Get you comfortable in using, explain the buyer broker agreement. Absolutely. Should be doing that now. Should be presenting that now. Develop a clear value proposition and compensation model presentation for clients. Absolutely. You are good. You need my job, right? I'll add one thing, clear value proposition for both the listing side and the buyer side, right? For both. Check for early MLS data removal, right? In local markets, your MLS, every MLS is different. I mean, every MLS is, kind of doing this differently. So whenever your MLS strips out that buyer, compensation fields. So today, let's assume you're in an MLS, it's still there. You don't need a buyer broker agreement, right? Because, they're already telling you what you're going to get paid, and you don't need something from the listing side, either the seller or the listing brokerage, saying you're going to get paid. Then we wake up tomorrow, all the data is gone, right? Then you need a buyer broker agreement to assure you're going to get paid, right? And then if you're making an offer, or whenever you think appropriate, whether it's a time of showing or at the time of submission of offer, you are going to submit a form, right, that either the seller or the seller's broker is going to sign, stating what your commission is. If your commission is 2% from the seller and your buyer broker agreement is 2.5%, 2% comes from the seller, 0.5% from the buyer. If your buyer broker agreement says 3% and they're only offering 2.5%, excuse me, if your buyer broker agreement is 2.5% and they're offering 3%, you only get 2.5%. Absolutely. I'm going to provide a follow-up. We're going to, hopefully the next one in 2 weeks or so will be on, how to present the buyer broker agreement, some ideas around that, and then a more in-depth, discussion of the forms. I would be shocked if those forms aren't out by then. That's the plan. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hey, Laura. Yep. I mean, everything is negotiable. Everything can be changed. Nothing is cast in stone. I mean, just like kind of like it is now with our commission, right? Sometimes we have to chip in a little bit to make the deal happen. Hey, Christina, that is a good question. I would say yes, but I'm going to double check on that. Yep, you can, when you're promoting your listing, you can talk about, what commission you're offering. It just can't be anywhere in the MLS, right? When we talk, Christina, about the video, you can put it in a video and mention it, right? You can put it in the Facebook group. You can post it on Facebook. You can put it in different, maybe you guys are part of different agent groups on Facebook. You can put it there. It just can't be anywhere near the MLS. Hey, Mike, is it illegal to show a property without a buyer broker agreement? Today, it's not. But as soon as that data is stripped out of the MLS, I'm not going to say it's illegal. So again, we have FREC, or your local, Georgia Real Estate Commission, Alabama right? So those, they have laws, right? So if we do something and we violate one of those licensing laws, that is illegal. But this is not that. These are MLS rules. This is an MLS rule. It is not, So you're not going to get in trouble. I know Mike is in Florida. You're not going to get in trouble with FREC, but you could, you show a buyer you know, without a property, like think of it like Phil's going to have to monitor this. Here's what I'm going to do. I don't know when you showed them that property. All I know is if you submit an offer and after that data is out of the MLS, you need a buyer broker agreement in there. When you're a buyer's agent and you're submitting your paperwork, right, the buyer broker agreement will be mandatory. Hey, Andrew, let's see. Percent. All right, let's see. So, yeah, I mean, you probably would want, I mean, I didn't know that you had percent as offered in the MLS. Yeah, you probably would want to get them to re-sign that because that's not going to be applicable anymore. Once that data, is out of, CPAR's MLS there. So that's really not going to pertain. So you probably want to take that out. Or can we still do it at will for first two homes? Okay. So Mike, here's the risk of doing that. One, it's really not the spirit of what we should be doing. And two, what if they like one of the homes? What if they like one? And then you find out, right? They're not offering any compensation, meaning the seller. And then the buyer now doesn't want to sign. You're out. You're done. You didn't get paid. Again, let me say that again. That's the risk. The risk, right? If you show them a few homes and I'm going to submit it later, or I'm going to have it, before the off. If they don't sign it and the seller's not offering anything, you're not gonna get paid. That's why you want it right from the get-go. All right, couple more questions and we will wrap it up. Let's see. Um, Can a buyer fire you after you showed them a house and then go back to the seller direct? Good question, Donald. All right, so there's two things, right? There's two things. One, commission. Two, representation, right? So sometimes who's representing you and who earned the commission is not the same. So if you have that buyer broker agreement and then, they say, hey, I don't want to work with you anymore, they would still owe us the commission. So they can't really do that. Can a brokerage list what each their commission agreements are to their agents? Hey, Chris, how are you? I'm not quite getting that question. Maybe expand upon it a little bit. Let's see this. Lisa says, how I think of it. If you are the listing agent, then you become a transaction broker and you are also the buyer's broker, you would want to be compensated. So therefore have the seller keep doing the same thing. Have the sellers compensate. Yeah, I mean, again, like it's cooperation, right? This system of cooperation and helping, you know, paying the buyer's agent. I mean, it developed out of, it used to be sub agency. If you go way back, right? Sub agency was everybody worked for the listing brokerage, right? And, you were a sub agent. Then it kind of evolved into, buyer brokerage, right? And that's kind of been the system we've been under for probably, a good 20 years. So, yeah, so I mean, the same thing. I mean, again, it's that transparency, it's that discussion. What discussion am I having with a seller? Well, there's a lot of buyer agents out there, and they definitely have the rapport with their client. Their client has signed a buyer broker agreement with them. Sometimes they may not have enough money. It's going to make your listing look a heck of a lot more attractive if we're offering something, right? I mean, again, today they can offer zero. As of last fall, they could offer $1. But I think what happened is nobody really explained it. They just shoved that listing agreement in front of the seller's face and they said, sign it. And I mean, I don't know. Like I always explained it, but sometimes I think not, so they just sign it. Having the seller offer compensation, especially, you know, things, again, if this was 2.5, 3 years ago, when things were like selling like hotcakes, then I think the buyer broker side would be harder because sellers would feel more entitled. That's not what's going on out there now. You guys know that. I mean, it's tough. That house has to be priced correctly. There aren't as many buyers. Not as many buyers can qualify due to the rates and just, where homes are priced, where the market is. So again, personally, I think it's a good thing that every seller compensate the buyer's agent. It'll help get their home sold, right? Again, one of the things, and this is from my days, I'm just going to take a couple more questions. One of my, people, what they do is they focus on the commission. The commission. Oh, I'm going to pay, say it's a $500,000 home. I'm going to pay you $15,000. That's what they focus on. But really what's important is how much they get at closing. Hey, there's a lot of work. I have to do a lot of work. I'm saving you all that work. Plus, I'm a much better negotiator. I got some tricks up my sleeve. Do you think a seller, if they got 3 offers, is going to know to go to highest and best and push those 3 buyers? Absolutely not. Right? That's where your value is. Right? That's what I mean, I've seen it over and over again. And I see people focus. I remember this one, buyer I helped, and it was really, I was selling his condo and he was trading up. It was like 300,000, his property, and he was buying like at 600, right? And we looked at every house. This is back when things were slow, just starting to turn. And then he goes, Phil, I saw this listing on Zillow for sale by owner. Can we go check it out? I'm like, he didn't call the guy directly. He called me. We go there and we look at each other and we're like, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. He underpriced his house literally $75,000. He didn't know what he's doing. I'm like, oh, can you pay me 2.5%? My guy was so happy. I got him the best deal ever. Did that seller make out? Absolutely not. He didn't know what he was doing. A good listing agent would have gotten him more money, even with the commission. That's what you got to communicate to people. Unfortunately, it happens on the back end once it closes, but right, those are the things. You're going to get them more money than if they do it themselves. You're going to make for a much better experience for that buyer. And then you got to deliver. You got to be there at that inspection. You got to negotiate that inspection. All right, one last question. Let's see. Hey, Kurt Noel. Zamara, good to see you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. John, buyer broker. Last question. Buyer broker is 3% and seller pays 2.5. Could we add verbiage that says agent and buyer agree that agent will take less commission? Assuming the buyers, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You can, it's just like, it's no different, right? It's no different than, if you have to give up some of your commission, to make the deal work. No different. You would just need a modification. You'd modify that, buyer broker agreement down to 2.5%. You're all good. Absolutely. All right. I hope, let's see, we have any, Nia, how if your buyer has enough money to cover the commission and closing costs? I don't know. You could ask them to show you, possibly. I don't know that I would go there. I mean, again, where I would be going, Neil and Maury, how are you? Is that I'm going to get that seller to pay that. I'm going to find you a house that you love where the seller is going to compensate me. That's the message. Thank you, Victoria. Victoria says listing agent doesn't need BBH for their own buyer broker agreement because commission is covered by the listing agreement. Absolutely. We touched upon that 100%. So Neil's asking, if somebody goes into an open house and, again, that's a great question. So let's think about that one. That's a really good one. What should happen is, and what hopefully you guys would do when you're the listing agent and that situation happens to you. Do you ask that buyer, hey, are you working with anybody? Do you have a signed buyer broker agreement with anybody? That's exactly what should happen. Because if that property goes under agreement and you find out we're due that commission, that never should have happened like that. I hear from a FREC member that many attorneys will pose as sellers and buyers to catch us doing something. Oh my goodness. I don't know about that. I haven't heard that. I don't know. Maybe that is true. I don't know. I mean, hopefully that's not the case. But again, like, don't do anything incorrectly. They've told us why are we having this webinar? Right? So we know the rules. We want to operate within the rules. We need to operate within the rules. And if everybody operates within the rules, then there's no issue. I know there's, not professional realtors out there, and what happens, I find is they get more and more emboldened, they just, they don't care because nobody really calls them out. Nobody complains. So again, I had one a few months ago where, the agent showed, it's $1 million property, good commission, and the client wasn't quite ready. And then, they asked the question of the listing agent, and they started a conversation. Next thing you know, the listing agent's writing up the offer. We could have taken them, we ended up getting a referral agreement, but it's that type of behavior, right? It's clean it up. Ask people. Again, somebody approaches you as the listing agent. I mean, before you didn't really have to ask because most times people didn't have that buyer broker agreement. Now everybody's going to have it. What are you going to do? You're going to sell, you're going to, take the chance that then, they're going to come back and file a complaint against us. Thank you, Pedro. You nailed it. You nailed it. Greedy. It's true. Just say it. Many are greedy and ruin it for those who are not. Absolutely. They only care about the money and they don't care about the client. It's all about them. I never got that. I never, my thing was if you do a great job for your client, they tell other people and you get more business. let's see, Linda says, so if you have a listing after August 17th, you can list a commission for 5% and offer buyer's agent 2% in a buyer broker agreement. No, nope. So no, that's not. So Linda, okay, I'm hearing a little confusion. So there's the listing agreement, right? The listing agreement. The listing, let's talk about that. Listing agreement. How much is, we'll say Dalton Wade, how much are we getting? We use 6%. Then how much are we paying? How much out of that 6% are we offering a buyer to bring somebody by the property, to make an offer, to buy the house? That can be zero. It can be 1, 2, 3, or 4%, right? But in the listing agreement, and this is going to continue, this isn't changing, what are we offering the buyer's agent? And then when you're working with a buyer, you have a buyer broker agreement where they are telling you, hey, I am compensating you this, right? And then when you go and find them a property, if the seller is offering something, whatever, right? Let's say it's less than what you've agreed to with your buyer, the buyer makes up the difference. If it's more than what the buyer is, agreed to, you only get what the buyer agreed to. So I think this is just a much, much better system once it's all implemented. All right. Hey, Carrie, our transaction fees no longer allowed. That's a good one. I have to follow up on that. I believe they should be, but I'm going to double check on that. What do we do with rentals? So this doesn't apply to rentals, right? It's just, purchase and sale. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. So here's the schedule. Appreciate everyone seems to enjoy this. We'll be back, 2 to 3 weeks with hopefully the forms and then kind of a detailed, presentation on, how to really present that buyer broker agreement. Hey, Serena, how are you? Thank you so much. All right, everyone, have a great night. Certainly if there was a question you didn't, have answered, shoot me an email. Happy to answer them. Appreciate it, everyone. All right, have a great evening. Thank you. Enjoy. We'll be back. Thank you for being here. You guys are awesome. Good night.